We are going to be making a very crude review of the Galaxy S10 Plus. Now, I've been using this phone for approximately 8 months, and I'm just going to start off by saying that I don't necessarily consider these phones to be Android phones. Usually when I'm recommending phones to people, I will suggest an iPhone, an Android phone, or a Samsung phone, just because these are so far off from what Android actually is. It's almost like a completely different phone to try and use. So I have my notes over here on just some things that I'm going to tear into. I'm not going to be getting into any of the huge advantages of this phone, as pretty much all phones these days, they're fairly similar. The camera on it, oh, look how good the camera is. You know, like it's not the end of the world if one is just mildly better than the other one. We're not going to go into huge things. It's mostly just going to be the usability of this phone. So as you can see, I have been using this phone for a very long time. Now, the main thing that I want to get into here, which you'll just see, is the face unlock. So sometimes it's really quick. Sometimes it's not. Now, if we hold it away, I can do the fingerprint. Which is also really slow. Lots of times it won't work at all, depending on how I hold my finger. Even though when I was pairing it, it tells you to hold your finger at multiple different angles, which I was doing, but like, no match. And I didn't move my finger any different, and it worked. So the fingerprint reader in the screen is very temperamental. The front camera for face unlock, there it goes. It's incredibly slow. Also, there's a huge downfall if, for whatever reason, I haven't shaved in a few days. It also picks up a huge delay trying to recognize my face, and a big issue with this is you can only recognize one face. If you are like me and work on cars frequently, when you're working on a car, sometimes you're not wearing your glasses. Suddenly, the face unlock doesn't recognize very well. Your hands are covered in grease. The fingerprint reader doesn't work. So it kind of limits your access into the phone by only allowing you to have one pair for this. The fingerprint reader isn't as bad, but it's still just, it's slow, it's very temperamental, it doesn't work very good. Now, another issue that I wanted to get into, if I were to use Samsung Messages, which is fine, I'm going to kind of just say fine because it's not exactly the greatest thing. If I were to use Samsung Messages, I can use RCS, which we have across Canada, across all networks. However, Samsung has locked this out, so you can't use Google Messages. We open Google Messages, settings, chat features. Chat is unavailable for this device. Your device does not currently support this feature. Now, a lot of international customers will have seen this before trying to use RCS when it first came out, but in Canada, we do have access to this. So if you do this on a Pixel, it just works. You can connect, you can register for RCS, and everything is fine. I can't do it on this specific phone because it's a Samsung, and they've blocked it out, so you can only use RCS on Samsung Messages. Now, the next downfall is that you can only use RCS on Samsung Messages with another Samsung phone using Samsung Messages, which basically makes this iMessage for Android with less features. So this is just a downgraded version of iMessage for Android to only other Samsung people, which is why, again, I strongly talk about this phone as not being Android. It's its own environment. Now, another thing with Samsung is they're known for having the back button on the opposite side of the phone. You can change this. So we will go to the nav bar settings. In here, we can switch it around right here. So now the back button is on the proper side. Another thing is this is running Android 10, and we can do the gestures. This just kind of confuses me for a bit. Normally you have the navigation buttons. That is the classic Android. This is the classic Samsung with the back button on the right side, whereas all other Android devices use it on the left side where it's supposed to be, because you're going back, not for like in reading, you know, you'd read from the left to the right. So when you're going back, you're generally heading to the left. So it's just kind of right there. It's naturally there. Being on the right, it's just confusing, and I don't understand why they did it. It's the Apple mentality of Samsung. They're just doing it to simply be different from everyone else, which is a terrible motto, because once you get used to this, you try and use another Android phone and suddenly everything's different and you want to go back to this, which is the same thing with iPhone users switching to Android and then being overwhelmed by too many options and then going back to the simplicity of iOS. We can go to the gestures And this was an option in Android 9, was you had these gestures here. So if we want to go back to the home, you just slide up in the middle. Now, there's not a huge deal there, but if you wanted to open the multitask, for instance, if you swipe too far over, you open Samsung Pay, and you can't turn that off with the launcher. So we're gonna go back, close Samsung Pay. I'm gonna go back here, and now with Android 10, we can actually enable the proper gestures for Android 10, which is essentially just the Apple gestures of Android now. It's the stupidest thing, but so if we want to go back, we swipe. Oh, the multitask. Oh my God. This is so... There it goes. So as you can see, this doesn't work very well. So for this particular phone, what I was doing, I was going to the gestures, but I was keeping these older ones from Android 9 because at least these ones work. And I'm not saying the Android gestures don't work. They work very good on my current phone. So if we open, say, the Play Store and we click on an app and we want to go back, you just go back. Or you can go back from this side. It's just the ease of access. It works very well. As you can see, it's very, very quick using it on a device where it actually works. Samsung, not so much. Try biometrics again in 26 seconds. Excellent. I can't use face unlock either. So that's a perfect example of how aggravating this is trying to use when you're working on cars or anything where your hands aren't completely clean. And even when they are, it still doesn't work properly. Okay, so another issue that they've fixed was the ridiculous keyboard notification. So if I were to open anything and begin to type, I'm using the Google keyboard. Now, as soon as this keyboard would open, I would get a persistent notification that would not go away. This is another one where I was already using this phone and I've done a factory reset, deleted everything, and I've set this up as a new device. Now, it's continuously telling me to finish my setup by going and copying my data from my backup, which I intentionally set to set this up as a new device so it wouldn't have any of the old files on it. And now it's pestering me to get the old files back on it. And I haven't currently figured out a way to actually get rid of that without using a different Google account. This is a perfect example of the persistent notifications that just don't go away. Like you can't, oh, it actually went away that time. It wouldn't go away earlier. With the keyboard, if you opened it and you just typed in anything like YouTube, while you're typing, you get a notification at the top telling you, hey, you should switch to the Samsung keyboard. Even though I've intentionally installed a Google keyboard, I've switched it to the Google keyboard as my default, and I'm trying to use it, and it continues to tell me. Now, that was an Android 9 issue. Now with Android 10, they finally kind of got the picture that people want to use alternate apps. Another one was with messages. If you use Google Messages, it recommends that you switch to Samsung Messages so you can get the benefits of the chat features, which is RCS, that they've blocked you from using in the Google Messages. So that's the keyboard issues. Another one is in here, we have our default keyboard set to Gboard. Samsung keyboard is the other one, manage keyboards. We cannot get rid of the Samsung keyboard. It's grayed out. They force you to have it. You can't get rid of it. This is, again, the Apple mentality of Samsung and why I refuse to accept these as an actual Android phone, because you are forced to keep this in here even if you intend to never use it again. Now you might be thinking, well, this is a fail-safe, so that way you always have a default keyboard that you can't delete in case you end up deleting Gboard and then don't have another one to type in keyboard into Play Store so you can download another one. Just gray out the default one. Whatever the default keyboard is, just gray that one out so you can't disable it. But they don't, because they want everyone to use their Samsung keyboard for marketing, because it monitors things that you're typing and then anonymously sends it to Samsung so they know how to improve autocorrect and different things that you frequently search for or type in, so that they can use that for marketing to help promote better products in the future. But essentially, they're just using you as a marketing piece. Not to say that Google doesn't do the same thing, but at least with Google, they let you opt in or out of this option, as well as being able to changing themes and everything. So we can do a dark theme. We can have the keys on or off. I prefer them off. This is a much nicer look. Oh, it switched back to the Samsung one now. Default Gboard. There we go. Much cleaner design. Now dark mode on. Love the dark mode on this phone. It's not entirely black, still has gray accents around everything, which, I mean, it completely defeats the purpose of having a dark mode because it's still technically projecting gray. Only the black areas are where the pixels are actually off, saving battery life, so really you're not saving any battery life by using this. I just think it looks significantly better. So now, with everything dark, looks much nicer, much cleaner, matches the dark aesthetic of the phone. Okay, so now another issue, or rather another annoyance with this, is if we go to apps, in here, you have all of these pre-installed. The only things that I've installed in here was Chrome, the Google keyboard, and the Google Messages. So this is all pre-installed. All of this. Now, we go back through this. We can start off with Bixby. I don't know a single person that actually uses this. Briefing, don't use that. Can't delete it. You can only disable it. So we can disable the app, but technically it's still installed. It's still taking up space. It's just we can't open it. Why don't you just let us uninstall it? And this is going to kind of get into the next one here of not being able to remove these via root, because you can't root these phones unless you have the international version. Dictionary app, forcefully installed. We can only disable it. Here's another one, Facebook. I don't have Facebook. We can only disable it. Can't delete Facebook. Oh, they've gotten rid of it. Instagram was another one on Android 9, but apparently Android 10, they actually got rid of Instagram from being a pre-installed app. The Samsung Messages, you can't even disable this one. Office is a new pre-installed app. Apparently can't uninstall that one. One UI Home, can't disable that even if you use a different launcher. Samsung Cloud, can't disable that even if you're using Google Drive. Samsung Internet Browser, can't disable that even if you're using Chrome. So there's so many alternatives and they just won't let you remove them. Spotify, oh, apparently I can uninstall this one. This is another glitch. Oh, it actually worked. It'll get stuck on that screen a lot. Tips, how to use your phone. I know how, but I can't even disable that one. Let's try uninstall Office, see if that glitches out. Is it gonna do it? I don't think it's gonna do it. I think it's stuck. So after uninstalling an app, it ends up getting stuck here, and now we are scrolled all the way down to Office. So now when we go back to apps, it starts at the beginning. So if you're going through here trying to clean stuff up and then it glitches out as soon as you uninstall something. Game launcher. This is just a launcher dedicated towards games, so it only shows your game apps. You can't disable it. What if you don't game on your phone? It's annoying over anything, just having all of this crap in your phone that you can't get rid of, you can't control. You're not in control of the phone, especially with the price tag of this being $1,600 Canadian plus tax. You're looking at just shy of $2,000 for one of these, and you can't do everything you want with an almost $2,000 phone. It's kind of messed up. Another really excellent feature here is the pinhole camera in the top corner. Open this video here, rotate, everything's fine. But if we want to zoom in, we have this in the corner of the video the entire time. Whereas at least with the Pixel, when you go full screen, instead of it zooming in all the way with the notch here on the Pixel 3, they just kind of got the idea with the Pixel 4 where it's all the way over, and when you zoom in, it only goes to the edge of the camera and then it extends further this way to fill the rest of the screen. So it is offset, but at least you don't have this sitting there and you get more viewing angle of your display. So it's not exactly the most OCD acceptable, but it's better than having these essential dead pixels in the middle of your display. Some good, I guess, is this phone does have a headphone jack. It does have a down-firing speaker, which is very loud, and the earpiece is your upper speaker, so when you're holding it, you know, you gotta have to kind of cup this side, but you do get fairly decent audio in it. I did notice that if you're using it this way, your hand covers this a lot, So when you're using the phone, you pretty much have to use it this way so your hand doesn't cover the speaker, or you have to cup it. I mean, there's kind of like a dedicated orientation on how you're supposed to hold the phone in order to get sound out of the bottom facing speaker, which I think is the stupidest design considering the phone faces you, but then they put the speaker pointed down. Like it's not like that in a car. You don't get in your car and the speakers point out the bottom of the car. Like they point towards you on the sides, towards your ears where you're facing. It just makes sense. I don't understand this whole thing. Apple ruined this for everyone. The included headphones, which I have currently lost, I'm not sure where they are. They're by AKG and they are absolutely amazing. For just free headphones that you get with a phone, they're fantastic. I've never actually used the factory charger that came with this phone. I've been using an Anker one, which works fine. Fast charge works. The phone charges really fast. This phone does have an SD card slot, so it does have expandable storage. This is the 128 gig model, and it supports up to 2 terabyte. Not that 2 terabyte micro SD cards currently exist. It is a fingerprint magnet, this thing. I've washed my hands before using this phone, and it's just... picks up fingerprints like it's its day job. Just like the stupid camera review things, if we open the camera, it's really weird. I'm not sure if this is picking it up in the same color or fashion, but the video is looking really purple, or the camera is looking really green for some reason. One thing, the camera glitches out a lot with stability on if you move around a bunch and then lock it in on something. No, it's not doing it. It'll just have like a slight glitch because the optical image stabilization for the main camera. So right now we're holding it and the lens inside is moving around in little micro movements, trying to keep the image stable. But if you're moving it around and it's slowly moving it and it reaches one side, it'll just snap back over to center itself so it can have play again to move around. And I've actually only noticed this being an issue on this phone. With Android 10, it still persists, but the camera itself is actually like unbelievably good. But that's pretty much like every smartphone for today, is that the cameras are just unbelievably good. So you can see the grain in the phone case. It has nice bokeh. That's not portrait mode or anything. This kind of goes with a grain of salt because this camera is fantastic. If you zoom in, this camera is not. And then the wide angle. So if we compare these for clarity's sake, you can barely read McLaren. On here, there's almost no light difference. Like it just doesn't pick up detail. This just feels like a camera from like 2014 if you use the zoom lens. But the regular main camera is unreal. So you got a 1 out of 3 for the cameras. The wide angle is completely a gimmick. It's terrible on this. The quality is just awful. The zoom lens is, it's okay. It's the same as like an older smartphone, but the main camera is, that's the moneymaker. So that's just the regular camera. That's not portrait mode. You can see my fingerprint on the lens and see the grain in the plastic. Like the camera is unbelievable. But don't take this as this is the greatest camera ever and you should buy it. This OnePlus 7T cost about half as much as this phone, and this phone completely destroys this thing. That's pretty much it for this phone. If you are an iOS user and you want to get into Android, this is probably your best bet. It's expensive for no reason. You get tons of features, so you're actually kind of getting a little bit more for what you pay for. It's definitely not what I would consider to be Android, as everything about this is different. You have tons of apps that you can't delete, so you can put into a useless app folder, just like iOS. It has tons of proprietary programs, even though there's third-party alternatives to it. You can't remove those, even if you use the alternatives as your defaults. The camera's really good. The front-facing camera is different. So we have the main camera here, and then the wide version. Wow. These dual front cameras are a complete gimmick. It's just the stupidest thing ever. Like, there's no reason at all that you need to. The wide angle camera does nothing. You barely get anything more into it. Not to mention the quality on both of the cameras is just horrendous. The quality is similar to the wide angle camera on the back in terms of clarity. Now I believe that was pretty much everything that I wanted to get into with this phone. The battery life is all right. Since Android 10, the battery life is horrendous. Normally at work, I would check my phone around noon and my phone would be at about 80%. So I'd lose roughly 20% from somewhere between 7 and 8 in the morning until noon. And that's just with very light use, taking pictures at work. That's part of my job. Uploading files, so I'm using data or Wi-Fi. So it's just kind of like a normal use. Sometimes I'd be streaming audio, and it's usually right about 20% battery drain. Since Android 10, it's 40%, consistently 40%. So it uses about twice as much battery as it used to with Android 10. However, a lot of the Android 9 issues with the persistent notifications and pestering you to use all the Samsung stuff instead of the alternatives was in Android 9. So you either have to stay on Android 9, deal with all of the notifications harassing you to use Samsung applications instead of the ones that you want to use, or upgrade to Android 10, suffer with essentially half of your battery life gone, as well as tons of apps crashing. There's this one specifically that I use called Car Meets, and it's basically Instagram and Snapchat Snap Maps combined. So it's just like a car feed. You make profiles for your cars, upload pictures, your modifications, everything, and then people can follow your cars, like pictures. It's Instagram with car profiles, so kind of like Facebook, but then also Snap Map, because you can go live, and when you're going for a drive and you want to hang out with people, you can just go live and it'll show where you are, what car you're in, and then people can meet up with you and drive around, and you can go do whatever, photo shoots, go for coffee, all that stuff. It's a cool app. However, as soon as I upgraded to Android 10, didn't work. I bought a different phone, Android 10, used the app, same version, works perfectly. Tried it again on this one, thinking that maybe there might have been an app update, benefit of the doubt. Still didn't work. I've tried doing a factory reset, doesn't work. I don't know, man. Samsung just doesn't have it going on. They don't know what they're doing. They're a marketing company. They're not a software company. I will say that One UI is like worlds better than TouchWiz. TouchWiz was just absolutely horrendous. And I really wish someone at Samsung was listening, where if they were to make this device hardware-wise and then just run a clean version of Android, just like every other Android phone, just get rid of all the Samsung stuff. Stop having individual Samsung everything. Just have Android everything, like every other phone. Well, actually, they probably shouldn't do that, because there wouldn't be a market for any other phone, because these would be the #1 phones that everyone would end up buying because of the hardware specifications for these. But that's pretty much my rant on the Galaxy S10. If you're looking for a new phone, you're a Samsung fanboy, fangirl, if you are an Apple user and you want to venture into Android, this is the phone to get. If you're a Samsung user, this is the phone to get. If you are an Android user, stay the hell away from this abomination of a phone, because this was the hardest thing to try and use, going from continuously, I don't want to say lightly modified, but at least Android versions of phones. I was going from Google to LG to Asus. So they all kind of had their own little tweaks, but at least with those ones, you could delete a lot of what was on there and essentially convert them into as close to a Pixel experience as you could. This, you just can't. No matter what you do, you can't make this one close to a Pixel. Now, there is root for this phone on Android 9, but it uses a dual boot system. It's not what you think. It gives you root access, so then you can access the system apps and you can delete a lot of Samsung stuff. However, when you restart the phone, it'll just restart normally back to an unrooted state. But when it reboots to an unrooted state, tons of stuff doesn't work, because there's system apps that are removed that the phone is completely unfamiliar with why those apps are even missing, because root is not something that this phone is known to have. So if you remove Samsung Pay, everything glitches out. NFC doesn't work. The Beam, I think it's called, doesn't work. If you try and use NFC, the phone just completely force restarts. So even if you do acquire root access on this using the dual boot method with the Snapdragon processors, it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's just not a good experience. This whole phone is just terrible. How I put up with it for the last 6 to 8 months, I'll get into in a different video. For now, this is going back in the box, and I am going to continue to fully enjoy My OnePlus 7T Pro McLaren 5G, the stupidest, longest name ever for possibly the greatest phone ever made. Oh, look, everything works. Face unlock works. This isn't a comparison video, but I mean, this is half the price. Everything, I can't get over how stupidly expensive this phone is for how terrible it is. And this is half the price. You don't have a notch. Fingerprint reader works. But we're not getting into a review on this thing. This phone is essentially perfect. This phone is an absolute piece of shit. I hate this phone. I don't know, subscribe or like or whatever. I don't know, do whatever. Nothing matters.